Hi parents, want to find the number one reason why your child may be completely plateaued or seeing little to no progress in PT and OT and other movement-based therapies, despite maybe months or even years of these incredible therapies going into your child's weekly schedule, looking to see progress, looking to see catching up with their gross motor milestone delays or their developmental delays overall? Have you been told that the number one root cause your child struggles with gross motor at developmental milestones is because of low tone and a weak core? Dig in all the way with this video if your child struggles with their posture, with their movement, if they fatigue easily, slouch all the time, and also because gross motor milestones and dysfunction, delays, and dysregulation here is very connected to sensory meltdowns, emotional behavioral dysregulation in kids as well. Get through this video all the way together because you're going to find out exactly what's behind those plateaus or those stuck points in therapy and how to break through them and get your child back on track developmentally and with their gross motor function. See, when we get into the real root cause of gross motor delays and developmental milestones being missed or off track altogether, there's always something more going on than just low muscle tone and a weak core. See, the way the nervous system works is you actually have to have an area of what's called hypertonicity or tension stuck, bottled up within the nervous system and within the neuromuscular or neuromotor system that holds or kind of contains this stuck stress in certain muscle groups and certain areas of the nervous system, which prevents it from being distributed to the core and to the limbs that facilitate crawling, or actually let's go back in order, that facilitates tummy time, rolling over, army crawling, cross crawling, furniture cruising, walking. And then once your child gets to walking and running, can they do it efficiently? Can they do it with endurance so that their gross motor development continues? Because I bet you already know this if you're in PT and OT. This gross motor and just motor milestone development overall is essential to brain development. So if a child gets off track with their developmental or gross motor milestones, we know that they're at a higher risk of sensory challenges, ADHD, emotional, behavioral dysregulation, and even focus, concentration, and cognition challenges later on in school and later on in life. So watch this video all the way through so that I can get you to the very end and the full explanation of how you get something. My favorite nerdy phrase is 1 + 1 = 11. You're going to find in this video that PT, OT, and movement-based therapies are essential to take care of a kiddo's developmental milestones, gross motor challenges, and these issues we're talking about right in the front of this video. But when you find the real root cause of what threw this thing off track in the first place, and you address that as well, now that one thing that you maybe have never heard of, maybe never thought of before, added into the traditional things like PT and OT makes all the difference for kids and gets them back on track, gets them to break through that plateau and really rocking it with gross motor function, muscle tone, coordination, you name it. So before we get into the science and the neurology of exactly what that one missing link root cause issue is to gross motor milestones and developmental delays, let's share a story that illustrates this perfectly. Our little buddy, Joseph. Now, Joseph, by the time we met him, actually was not that little anymore. Tall, skinny, 12-year-old Joseph had gone through a decade of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and other movement-based therapies to try and get his gross motor function, his posture, and especially what's called his tone, his coordination, and his endurance back on track. And after many years of doing all they could through physical therapy and so forth, his amazing mom, Amy, and their family kind of just gave up on it. They didn't think he would ever see progress. They thought he would always be exhausted, slumped over, shoulders leaned forward, head hanging out in space. And when we met Joseph, that's exactly what he looked like, because that's exactly how his neuromuscular system was functioning. See, what was going on with Joseph is he had started with what we call the perfect storm triggers of a high-stress pregnancy, birth intervention that really leads to birth trauma to the brainstem and the cerebellum and the area that controls motor tone and coordination through the neurospinal system and then into the rest of the muscles. And so what was actually going on with Joseph is he was holding so much tension, what we call subluxation or hypertonicity, into his neck and his shoulders. It was all bottled up and stuck in this one place that no one had ever checked. No one had ever done an examination or evaluation of Joseph's neck and nervous system in the most important place for gross motor function, tone, and coordination, which is the brainstem and the upper cervical spine. See, the way that your child's nervous system is designed is this back of the brain and what's called the bottom of the brain, kind of collectively called the brainstem area. That is air traffic control for all motor tone and coordination. And so all of that brain to body communication from the muscles to the brain and from the brain to the muscles, all muscles, the big ones, the little ones, you name it, it all has to pass through this brainstem, cerebellum, upper cervical area. And that area is in charge of processing what's called proprioception and mechanoreception, which is the perception of movement, perception of positioning. And it also controls our vestibular function, which is balance, tone, and coordination in that way. So what happens, like Joseph, when there's a significant birth trauma, things like forceps, vacuum, C-section, induction, breech position, cord wrapped, and then from there, the child becomes torticollis, plagiocephaly, difficulty nursing, chronic ear infections. These are all signs of this upper cervical subluxation and neuromuscular dysfunction that really goes undetected through traditional pediatrician, PT, OT exams. What happens once you have this subluxation, sympathetic dominance, and tension stuck in the neck and shoulders like Joseph does, just like if you and I had this tension, eventually over time, tension becomes exhaustion. And that's where the low muscle tone, low motor tone, and weak core sets in, because it begins immediately throwing developmental milestones and what we call the sequencing or the order of gross motor function off track. So not only does development get delayed, but there's this subluxation, there's this tension stuck in the neck and shoulders that gets in the way. So through Joseph's story, I kind of merged them together, and his story is teaching us the science behind the real root cause of gross motor delays, developmental delays, and really to the root of it, yes, a weak core, yes, low muscle tone may be the easy diagnosis that you can observe through physical therapy, occupational therapy, and so forth for your kiddo. But the question remains, what's causing the low muscle tone in the first place? In so many cases, that original trigger goes all the way back to pregnancy, in utero positioning, but especially labor and delivery. And if there was intervention involved in that early stage of life, that first moment outside here dealing with gravity, aka movement and motor development, and that baby's nervous system's needing to coordinate the tone and function of its muscles on its own, well, that's where this gets thrown off track right away. So that brainstem area becomes subluxated, tense, and that's called sympathetic dominance. And once that hypertone gets stuck in those nerves and those muscles, there's just not enough to go down to the core. So think about someone who you know who always has tension in their neck and their shoulders, or maybe you've experienced this yourself. What happens after you've got this constant tension? For a lot of moms, for a lot of dads, they get what's called that suboccipital headache, that tension headache right here. They get that pain between their shoulders and their traps and their lower neck. And over time, after you're dealing with all that tension, which we feel physically, thankfully, our babies, our toddlers, our kiddos do not feel the tension physically, but they'll experience that tension from their sensory motor system. And so just like for us, that tension builds up over time and we get exhausted and we just want to let our shoulders drop and our posture fatigue and our neck hang out in space. Well, that leads to core deconditioning for us. Well, for a child, the core never got activated to even have a chance to get deconditioned. So when a PT or a movement-based therapist comes into play and is constantly trying to strengthen the core and work on low muscle tone, it'll never stick. It'll never last. It'll never hold, as we like to call it, as long as that hypertonicity, that subluxation and sympathetic dominance exists in the upper cervical spine and the traps and that area. Before we wrap this video up, let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so here on the screen, we are looking at what's called an EMG scan from our office. I'm a neurologically focused pediatric chiropractor, and this is our exact specialty, finding the real root cause of these neurodevelopmental delays, and especially gross motor function is really our wheelhouse. And we can do an examination using this technology called the Insight scans that really addresses the root cause dysfunction. And the root cause dysfunction, like we've been talking about with this whole video, it's actually two-pronged, not one-pronged. It's not just a weak core or low muscle tone. It's actually what's called hypertonicity first. So when you look at this child scan, this is a kiddo just like Joseph who had significant gross motor delays and exhausted posture, and therefore was also dealing with tons of emotional behavioral dysregulation and just kind of brain-based developmental delays as well. What you have here is you have high or hypertonicity. So all of those reds, you can see that there's more tension stuck in these nerves and muscles on the left, which is the scan of this child facing these delays and these challenges. And the scan on the right is the optimal scan, where you can see that these muscles in the neck and that area are pretty relaxed. They obviously have a very important job to do to hold up the head and so forth, but those are smaller muscles and less of a load, if you will, compared to the muscles down here in the core. So as we draw this out from the optimal scan, this here is that core. And you see those bars, which are measuring the neurological tone within those muscles. Those are stronger on this optimal scan in the upper right. But here for this child, you can see that when we go through and we look at where his core is, you can actually see yellows. That is hypo or low core, low neuromuscular tone. But he only is dealing with that low because there was an original birth trauma that triggered tension into his brainstem and upper cervical. And if you zone in here with me, you'll really see that even more so, that in the upper cervical and what's called cervical thoracic junction and the traps, you'll see this counter torque pattern. Now, counter torque asymmetry is a sure sign of subluxation and hypertonicity. And so this tension here, and you can measure it, this is the same scan, just looked at differently. You see tension in these areas where we draw this, I'm going to switch colors, we'll draw this red X to show the areas of tension. And then down here, you can see the areas of exhaustion with the yellow. That is hypotonicity or weakness. So if you put all that together, what we see is a low pattern score. Now, pattern is a neurodevelopmental term for for organization and overall neuromotor tone and coordination. All three of these scores should be 100. And when that score goes low, that's a child who is absolutely going to struggle with missed gross motor milestones. That is a child who is absolutely going to plateau in PT, OT, and movement-based therapies. And that is a child much more likely to struggle with emotional dysregulation, behavioral dysregulation, social, and other sort of cognitive developmental delays as well, because their nervous system is dysregulated, disorganized, and it has too much tension up top and too little proprioception, or what's called neuromotor tone, into that core. So in a case like Joseph's, in a case like we just looked like on that and just went through on that scan, that weakness in the core is never going to get stabilized and get strong as long as that tension is stuck in the neck and shoulders. So I know in this video, I went extra nerdy. We even showed a scan. We even went through the interpretation of the scan. But I know for so many families who have been doing a serious run of movement-based therapies, which are, by the way, essential, effective, and incredible, and they are even more, drastically more effective when you add neurotonal, neurologically focused chiropractic adjustments to take the tension out of the areas that are subluxated and stuck. And we can also actually make adjustments that stimulate and activate those weak neuromuscular patterns as well. So different techniques do different things for your child's developing nervous system. And when you see a neurologically focused, trained, experienced pediatric chiropractor, they have a multitude of tools in their toolkit, if you will, a multitude of techniques that are ridiculously safe, gentle, and effective that release and clear out that stuck subluxation and sympathetic dominance. And then there's a different form of techniques that create adjustments that stimulate and activate those weakened neuromuscular patterns as well. And a child dealing with these challenges needs both. Both techniques of adjustments from a trained and ready chiropractor, and both pediatric chiropractic and movement-based therapies to get all the way back on track. This video, I want to be clear as we wrap this one up. We are the biggest fans ever of working in integration and coordination, pun very intended, hand in hand and in collaboration with PTs, OTs, speech therapists. It's an essential part of our practice in our community to work on these kids collaboratively to get them better. It's an essential part of our practice to work on these kiddos' cases collaboratively with incredible movement-based therapists. But what we find every single day in our practice is because that's more of a first line of defense, a more recognizable area to go to for gross motor and developmental delays for your child. Neurologically focused chiropractic may be something brand new, but it could very well also be the exact missing link to break through that plateau or stuck point for your child and not only get tons of benefits from the adjustments alone, but once your child gets adjusted in this way, they're going to get more benefit, faster benefit, better benefit from PT and OT as well. So that's where the 1 + 1 = 11 metaphor or analogy, I never know which is which, comes into play. So if your child has been dealing with gross motor delays and has got stuck or plateaued in therapy and you want more, you want to see faster results, you want to see bigger results, it's your child. You absolutely deserve that. Just comment below with your questions or send us a DM to get more information, or check out the link in our bio. We'll link it to an article I wrote about gross motor milestones, developmental delays. We'll share more about subluxation, sympathetic dominance, and this technology. Learn more, find out more exactly how neurologically focused chiropractic could help your child. And any questions you have, once again, comment below, send us a DM, and we are here to help find your path for your child to that 1 + 1 = 11 effect.